Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Peter Lloyd. Coming up, what does the Climate Commission's first report mean for the Australian economy? Would Australians vote for a political party led by Bob Katter? And should David Hicks be allowed to keep the money made from that book? Our panel tonight, broadcaster and writer Sally Warhaft, lawyer Greg Barnes, and in Melbourne we welcome James Paterson from the Institute of Public Affairs. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Peter.
Well, the Federal Government's Climate Commission has released its first report laying out the case for urgent action on reducing carbon emissions. The author of the report says Australia simply can't afford to wait if we're to move across to clean energy.
We need to make decisions now that lead us on that pathway toward a decarbonised economy. So the critical point is we have to get emissions turned from the upward trajectory to the downward trajectory by the end of this decade at the very latest, and we have to make investment decisions this decade that put us on that long-term trajectory that minimises the cost to our economy. If we do it as an emergency step 2 decades down the track, it's going to cost us much, much more.
Well, the Chief Climate Commissioner, Tim Flannery, says the impact of climate change is becoming more apparent and the evidence more compelling.
It's clear from the report that the evidence is becoming more convincing year by year. It was always very good, even back in 2007. But for Australia, we're seeing impacts more clearly. We're seeing the sea level rise that was predicted. We're seeing the decline in rainfall continue, particularly in the southwest of Western Australia. We're seeing impacts on the Great Barrier Reef and so forth.
Tim Flannery, well, both Labor and the Greens have seized on the report to push the need for urgent action.
This Climate Commission work is a very good report confirming climate change is real and the time to act by pricing carbon is this year, so carbon can be priced from the middle of next year.
It is real, it is urgent. The discussion that should be going on is how quickly can we make the transformation, where are the opportunities, how are we positioning ourselves to get off fossil fuels?
Well, not surprisingly, perhaps, the Coalition MPs aren't all convinced. Senator Nick Minchin has labelled the report alarmist nonsense, and National Senator Barnaby Joyce says what Australia does won't make a difference.
We are not going to change the climate from this building. We can make people poorer, we can definitely do that. We can make people's lives more difficult, but we are not going to change the temperature of the globe. We are not going to affect the temperature of the globe. And this is the crucial fact that Mr Flannery will not be telling people. That basically this is a gesture, and if you get yourself tangled up in gestures that have no effect but make people's lives more miserable.
Well, you could almost have written those lines before the report was released today, Greg Barnes.
Well, if I was the Coalition and a Coalition strategist, I'm not sure I would have got Nick Minchin and Barnaby Joyce out there. I probably would have opted for Malcolm Turnbull because he's got a sensible take on the issue. And I think the risk is...
You may say.
Well, I may say. But I think that the risk for the Coalition is that I think most polls show that most people believe climate change is real, and this report will just confirm it. They risk marginalising themselves in a debate. If an independent commission of eminent scientists is saying, look, it is real, we've got to do something about it, and is essentially saying to the government and the opposition... Get policy together and get it together now.
Is Will Steffen tactically maybe going the wrong way to take two blues on one day? One, climate change is real. Number two, you're all dummies if you don't believe it.
Well, I agree with everything you say. My problem is the government's response, in a way, to this report. Hearing Julia Gillard today saying the science is in, climate change is real, man-made carbon pollution is making a difference to our planet and our climate. I felt like I'd woken up in mid-2006, not to mention a proposed report on asylum seekers and David Hicks. The people that need convincing are not going to be convinced by a new report. The government shouldn't be behaving as if it needs a report to act. It's got its policy through a very messy business of taking out a Prime Minister, changing their mind, bringing up a new one. It's time for them to actually implement their policy, and I don't see that they need another report to try and... Who are they trying to convince, is my question.
James Paterson in Melbourne, do you hear the snap, crackle and pop of culture wars?
Well, it's a good question. I guess it is an issue that's really dominated Australian debate for a long time, and I guess it could be considered to be part of the culture wars. But for me, I just looking at these reports this morning, and particularly the newspaper coverage, I was wondering what was new here. The alternative headlines on the front pages of the paper today could have been "Government Committee agrees with government policy." I mean, there was nothing surprising, there was nothing new, there was nothing interesting or different. It's the same thing that the government and its hand-picked advisors have been saying for a long time, and it doesn't change the fact that Australians are very, very concerned, not about climate change per se, but about action on climate change, because they're concerned that action on climate change will have an adverse impact on them, and this report doesn't change that.
Is part of the problem here that, in a sense, the climate change issue has become almost the whipping boy? It's the way retail politics is differentiated. And as a result, everyone's, hitting the sandbags on their favourite topic, because this is how the next election perhaps will be decided, Greg Barnes.
Well, look, I think that's right, Peter. I think that the opposition has got what it wanted, which is a government proposing a new tax, which is always a difficult sell, although it was sold very successfully by the Howard government in the late 1990s.